PYANG. You want to know how to compile correctly your YANG models. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Láďa Hutka, and in this part of the tutorial, I would like to talk more about practical things, about the steps that you probably want to do with your YANG modules, and especially if you are preparing these modules for publication in IETF standards. So if you do all the steps and the compilation will be okay, then Benoit will be happy, I guess. Otherwise, he will harass you to make it compile properly, because that's quite important, of course. If people publish internet drafts and modules that don't compile, it's not very helpful. Anyway, as before, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to interrupt me anytime and ask. So these are the steps I would like to cover. This is actually an abridged version of a tutorial that's available at PYANG wiki, and that web version has some more information, more details, and also covers other steps. So maybe you really want to go to that page and try some things yourself. And if you want to really try something, you need some software to be installed. So primarily it's PYANG, that's all it's about. And then there are other open source tools that you probably want to make things happen. Primarily it is libxml2 library with its tools. This package is mostly part of base operating systems, or it can be easily installed. And then there are some optional parts. I recommend to use Java-based tools, Jing and Trang, written by James Clark, and you can download them from that URL. And of course, you need a good editor to, especially if you want to edit XML, then I would, although I must admit I'm biased, being an Emacs user for the last 25 years maybe, but really, believe me, I think that at least in the open source area, and especially for editing XML, Emacs is by far the best tool you can get. There are other commercial editors like Oxygen that might be helpful as well, but I have not used them, so I can only talk about Emacs essentially. And because I'm a Mac user, I use Aquamax on OS X, which works fine. All right, yes.
Just a quick comment. There's a number of open source projects coming on to do WYSIWYG sort of YANG editors, web-based, and also Eclipse plugins and things like that. We should collect these together and have them posted maybe on YANG Central or something.
Yes, of course, but I'm sort of hardcore, old-fashioned Unix user, so I prefer to use standard traditional tools.
So that's a good point. We've been adding a couple of tools to YANG Central. So we really want to collect all of these. You got the question all the time. So there are tools to produce YANG models, but also libraries. So if you know of any that are not on the YANG Central, let us know. It's valid for everybody, right?
Now a few words about PYANG. PYANG is an open source tool written in Python. Most of it was written by Martin Bjerklund with contributions from myself and a few other people. And for some steps, and it's some XSLT style sheets, for example, are part of PYANG distribution. So what you also want to use is XSLT processor, and some tools are also written in as shell scripts. So Pyang is written in Python. We have been trying to support both Python 2 and Python 3 versions, and it's really painful, I can tell you, especially because we also want to support older Python 2 versions, and it's becoming more and more complicated, and I don't like this part actually very much. Anyway, theoretically, you should be able to use Pyang with both Python 2 and Python 3. Pyang is extensible via plugins. A number of plugins is already available, and you can write your own plugins if you want. And I think as a part of the hackathon, maybe some new plugins have been written. I don't know. And so this is quite useful. And I will show you a selection of the plugins that are available now and that are part of Pyang distribution. Pyang is under active development. Fortunately, the last stable version is quite recent, so most plugins are already in that stable version. Otherwise, usually you can get the most recent plugins, bug fixes, and so on from the GitHub page. Kent?
Question. Is that stable version using Yang 1.1 yet?
No, we have a branch on GitHub which is supposed to contain Yang 1.1 changes, yeah. But it's not very comprehensive so far, so you cannot expect really to validate Yang 1.1.
Right. Yeah, I'm synced to that Yang 1.1 branch already, and so the follow-up question is, do you know when that branch might? Like, when would it become comprehensive enough? Because as a draft author, I'm having issues validating my documents, and Benoit is, he likes to run these, evaluation tests, and all mine are failing, but only because they're using Yang 1.1.
Yes, I know that's a shortcoming, but we have to discuss this with Martin, and of course it's open source, so we just have other things to do, but of course we want to do that part as well as soon as possible, but depends on many things actually. Anyway, the last stable version is 1.6. We have discovered a bug so that you cannot use Unicode as a part of, or this, I mean non-ASCII characters currently, so probably there will soon be a 1.61.1 version. But anyway, this new version is installable via the standard Python packaging tool pip. And if you have an older version, I would recommend you to install this new version, because it has other nice features like bash completion and so on. Unix manual pages are part of Pyang distribution, so you can find most information about command line, or all information about command line parameters from those manual pages. So in particular, those two tools that I'm going to cover are described in manual pages. So here is a selection of interesting plugins that are part of Pyang distribution. Most of them just produce a specific output, and these plugins, these output plugins, are selected via the -F command line switch, and each of the plugins usually has a number of its specific command line parameters and options. So yes.
So from IETF draft point of view, let's say if I'm new to writing the Yang model, and if I'm writing a draft, which are all the tools that too much of information? I'm trying to see what is the most relevant information, what tool I should be using.
I'm going to cover really the basic steps you want to do with such internet, or rather with such a Yang module. This is just for information for you to see what you can do with Pyang, what kind of different outputs you can generate. So I'm not going to...
No, I'm not complaining about this. I'm trying to, see which is more relevant for me from my point of view. So
I think that you will be able to see it in the following slides, probably what you really want to do. But anyway, so I don't know whether Carl covered the fact that we also have an XML-based syntax for Yang modules. No, he didn't. So I'm going to tell you that what all those curly braces and so on, they are the so-called Yang syntax. But you can also use an alternative and equivalent XML-based syntax, which is called Yin. And so two output plugins in Pyang just convert between each other. Then you can generate DSDL schemas, and I will talk about that later. Actually, this is now not current information. The XSD plugin has been removed from version 1.6 because it has been incomplete and deprecated for a long time, and people just got confused, although there are still users that want to use XSD for some strange reason, but it's not available in Pyang anymore. Tree plugin is very useful. I will talk about that later. Then there are some plugins for producing UML stuff. And there's another even more special plugin that can be used, the output then can be used as input to a software, which is called OmniGraffle. It's only for Mac and iPad users, but apparently it produces very nice pictures, so it might be interesting to know about that. And then there are some other plugins for producing HTML input for browsers of different sort, JS3 and Hypertree. And then there are plugins that allow for converting between XML and JSON, encoding of instance documents. I will also briefly mention how this is done. And then there is also another relatively new plugin that enables generation of sample instance documents in XML. So there are maybe some more plugins, but these are those that are, in my opinion, the most interesting and important. Well, IETF is just a command line switch, isn't it? So it depends. Yeah, I will actually mention that. So first of all, you need to have some editor to produce Yang module. As I told you, I am an Emacs user. I don't want to get into some religious wars, but let me just mention that you can also use VI or Vim using a syntax file that's available from that URL. But as I said, Emacs has very advanced an XML mode that enables editing of XML in a very efficient and user-friendly way. So in fact, all my Yang modules I have written so far, almost, I write them as XML in the Yin syntax, and then I convert them to the Yang syntax for publishing in internet drafts, of course, because that's more readable. But the source format for me is XML. Some people think that this is a bit weird, so I'm not going to recommend it to in any way. But if you are interested in that, there is some wiki page I wrote that gives you some background and some reasons why I'm doing this strange thing. And of course, we need a real-life example, as Carl had MPLS. So I chose, and this is also in the web version of this tutorial, I chose Turing machine that we all know and love. And these Yang modules are also available in Pyang distribution in that directory. And for those who are really into fun, Radek Krejčí wrote a Turing machine simulator that can be managed via netconf using this data model. I think it's quite interesting. We used it in another tutorial somewhere, and I think it was really quite useful. So this is an URL where you can find that Turing machine simulation written in C and using some netconf libraries that you also need to install. Anyway, so here are the very essential steps that probably everybody has to do before publishing a Yang module in an internet draft. So first of all, you have to check the Yang module for correctness. This is done easily by using Pyang without any other command line options, just like that. And if this check reveals any errors, problems, then you have to go back to the editor and correct them, of course. Otherwise, then you can move further and then use that. So I don't know if we want to call it a plugin or something, but you meant like producing the canonical ordering of as the plugin. Okay. All right. So anyway, just terminology.
Right. I guess my point was that plugins can do more than just output translation. They can add command line parameters. They can do validation and so on.
Okay. So in any case, if you use that -- IETF option, stricter rules will be used for checking your module. So in particular, you have to have your Yang statements in a very particular order that's defined in RFC 6020 and in the internet draft that defines Yang 1.1, and other things that are not needed in general, but it is required because of the rules from RFC 6087 that essentially this check with that -- IETF do not show any errors. And so please do that before you publish your draft. And then, of course, if you want to see what the data model looks like, and also this is an information that should be included in an internet draft, because that's very useful as an overview of a data model content. It's very useful to use that tree output plugin that gives you some tree-based representation of the data model. I will show you how it looks like on the next slide, and Carl already had some examples. There are some symbols used in that tree view that may need some explanation, so you can get this by using that tree help option. And if we use it on that Turing machine module, it will show this output. So as you can see in the Turing machine data model, we have some state data that are marked with RO, and it follows essentially the Turing machine definition. So we have state and state of the Turing machine, head position, and then a representation of the tape. Then we also have a configuration that basically describes the transition function for the Turing machine. And then we also have an RPC for a Turing machine, which enables you to initialize and start the computation. And the parameter there is the input of, it means the initial content of the tape. And there is also one notification. The Turing machine is supposed to send this notification as soon as the computation halts. And it also sends as a parameter the state in which the Turing machine has ended up, right? So the main point of doing this is to have all areas that a Yang data model can cover. That means read-only state data, read-write configuration data, RPCs, and notifications.
Lada, if I'm not mistaken, we advise the people who produce draft to put the 3 in the draft. That's correct?
Yes, that's what I said. Yeah, it's really useful. And if you do that, please also include some explanation of the 3 symbols, because that's useful. You can find some template for such a section in the existing draft. So just copy and paste this into your draft. And now about validation. So it's also useful if you include some example of a configuration in your draft. And again, it's very useful if you do include this information to have an information that's correct and that's valid. Unfortunately, it happens every once in a while that if I try to validate those examples, they just are invalid. So this can just confuse people. So again, it's important if you include such examples to perform validation. In Pyang, this validation of instance data can be done using, or in XML, but I will tell you how to do it in JSON as well later. So it's done using so-called DSDL schemas. And I don't want to go into details about this DSDL family of schemas because it requires some XML background. But it's an international standard, and it's a coordinated set of schemas that essentially replace W3C schema language and add some more possibilities for validating semantics rules and so on. So we decided to use these schemas for validating XML, and there is a standard mapping of Yang data models to DSDL schemas. These are described in RFC 6110. And the point of, and it's implemented in Pyang in that DSDL plugin. And this plugin actually produces 3 schemas that are part of the DSDL standard. It's Relax NG schema that's used for checking grammar, the schema itself, and data types that Carl talked about previously. And then another schema is about semantic constraints, which is schematron, another well-known XML schema language. And then third part that's not very common so far is used for adding defaults to the instant document. I will again explain why this is necessary and how it works on the next slide. You can produce all 3 schemas by using that Yang to DSDL tool. This is actually a Unix shell script, and I wrote it in order to provide an example how to use these DSDL schemas in a validating tool. In fact, it turns out that it's useful in and by itself, so it's okay to use it for validating. But if you want to write a tool that also does some validation. Please don't put any execs and calling shells and using this shell script. This is not very good. Just look into the shell script and replicate all those steps using some library function calls and so on. This is, for example, what's done in libnetconf library. So this shell script tool can be really effectively used from a command line like this. So we can produce these three schemas like this. So you have to specify the target that you want to generate the schemas for. That means, in our case, we want to generate a schema for configuration, right? And here you can see the three schemas are saved in files, and their names are here on the right. And so if we generate these schemas, we can use them for editing a configuration, for sample example of configuration, let's say. But in order to save some typing, we can also use another Pyang plugin, which is called Sample XML Skeleton, for producing a skeleton instance document, which takes the data model and then puts an instance of every node that's found in that data model into the XML document. But then this skeleton document has to be edited. Usually it's not valid because, for example, for every choice that's in the data model, you will have all cases that are part of the choice included in that instance document. So usually you need to remove all cases but one from the instance document in order to make it valid. But anyway, it's just a technical point. If you edit this sample skeleton, you can also use Emacs, for example, for on-the-fly validation of this. For the NXML mode, by the way, you need to convert the relax ng schema to so-called compact syntax if you want to do that. And then if you load that into Emacs, it will validate the instance document on the fly using that relax ng schema. And now we can do all steps of validating the instance document using Yang to Disdal script. This can be done for our Turing machine model as follows. So here are the arrows and the annotations explain what the command line parameters are about. So -s tells the tool to use the pre-generated schemas rather than generate them anew, which takes some time. Then -j tells the tool to use that Jing Java-based validator. If you don't use this -j, the script uses the usual XML lint that's part of libxml suite. But in my experience, this XML lint, it works fine, but the problem with it is that its error messages are really horrible and they don't tell you anything about what's really happening, what's wrong with the document, whereas Jing is really very, very much focused and tells you exactly what you need to change in order to make the document valid. So I recommend using this every time. And then you have to provide the base name, like the tool needs to find these three schema files. So you need to give some information about the name of these schema files. And then you provide an instance XML document that you want to validate. And that's all. And you can see that the validation is done in 3 steps. It essentially in every step, one of the schemas, RelaxNG, DSRL, and schematron is used. And in this case, no errors are found. If there are some errors in the instance document, you will see some error messages that may help you to locate the source of the problem. Okay, so here is a picture which explains what's really going on. So, and this exactly follows the procedure how an instance document is supposed to be validated against a Yang data model. So in this case, we first have to check the structure, the schema itself, the grammar of the document, and data types. And this is what the RelaxNG schema does really well. So the first step, and then before we can check the semantic constraints, we have to fill in all defaults that may be missing in the instance document, because that's the rule of Yang, that all the defaults have to be provided before the semantic constraints are checked. And so this is what the DSRL schema provides. So this step is done and the initial XML document is changed so that all defaults are present in the new document. And this new document is then checked for all the semantic rules that are written in the data model are then checked using the schematron schema. So in effect, this covers all validity constraints that can be expressed in Yang, with some very minor exceptions that I will not discuss here. So that's also the reason why it was not actually possible to use XML schema, because XML schema could only cover the first part on the left, and there is no official way. You can actually use also schematron with XML schema, but that's not official. That's just some unofficial extension of XML schema, and so that's why we decided to use the DSDL schema languages. Any questions about this validation? I know it's a bit technical, so you may want to look into the web version of this tutorial, but this is how it is supposed to work. And we can also then use the same procedure for validating. What we did previously was validation of a configuration. Here, the config target, but we can use it for other document types, other instance documents. For example, on a notification for the Turing machine, we have one notification, and then notification can look like this, for example. And we can validate this XML instance document in the same way, just using another target that's indicated with a -t parameter, and it says that the schema should be for notification this time. And so as you can see, the Yang to this script produces 3 new schemas that can be used for validating notifications. And this time it does the validation at the same time. So again, no errors are found, and the validation procedure is exactly the same as before. And now the last part I want to talk about is converting XML instances to JSON and vice versa. Carl told you, and maybe this will be part of the next edition of this tutorial, that there is a new protocol that's an alternative to netconf. It's called RESTconf, and apart from other changes, it also allows for using JSON instead or along with XML for sending data back and forth between the client and server. So JSON is an optional media type in RESTconf. And Pyang also provides some means for converting, for actually doing a schema-based conversion between XML and JSON. That's quite important. You cannot use any off-the-shelf XML to JSON or JSON to XML converter, because there is quite a lot of information in the Yang data model that has to be taken into account in order to really produce a valid result. So, for example, it's important that numbers from XML are converted to JSON numbers and not to JSON strings, and so on. So Pyang helps with this, and the way how this is implemented is that Pyang can or JSON XSL plugin can be used for producing an XSLT style sheet. And as soon as you have this XSLT style sheet, you can use it for converting any XML instance. It means configuration, state data, notifications, RPC contents. You can convert them from XML to JSON. And I think this is quite useful. For example, if you need to perform this conversion in the device, it's not necessary to have Python installed on the device, so you can just produce this XSLT style sheet offline, then install it. And this XSLT style sheet only changes if the data model is changed. So as long as your device uses the same data model, you can use this XSLT style sheet for converting XML to JSON just by using any available off-the-shelf XSLT processor. So then, of course, the XSLT processor is applied and the style sheet is applied to an XML instance document in the usual way. So, for example, if you use that ubiquitous XSLT proc processor, it's done like this. And as I said, the same style sheet covers all document types. And by the way, Pyang also has JTOX plugin that does the opposite conversion. And for example, this can be useful for validating JSON data. I have been using it quite regularly for validating JSON data. It seems a bit complicated, so you need to convert JSON first to XML in order to be able to validate that XML using that DSDL procedure that I explained. But in my experience, it works quite fine and it is doable. So unless we have some JSON schema implemented, this is what Carl wants to do. This is, as far as I know, the only way available in open source tools how you can validate a JSON document against Yang data model. And to conclude, this is just a list of other resources that you might want to consult. So it's the NetMod working group pages where you can find. Yes, question?
Lin Hui from Tsinghua University. And I used to have Pyang warnings when I use the validators. It said that my models is too large, lots of definitions. Just wondering, is that some kind of suggestions from the IETF that I should not to make the module very large? Because actually I'm doing the Yang models for DSCP v6 and it's lots of work, very large model. So I just considering whether I have to split the model into small submodules or something like that.
Actually, I have never met this wording like data model too large.
Yeah, I cannot find
Martin, who should know?
I can
maybe
I
if
find
you can
this
send
one.
us really what the warning were, maybe it's just related to too long lines or something like that. But we have.
No. It just says I have lots of definitions. No definitions, not the file size, the size, not the size of the YAML file.
That's real strange because I'm not aware of any arbitrary limit that you can have for the depth of the hierarchy, for example, or things like that. So.
I guess, for issues that are found, then you should post the issue to the GitHub tracker, the PYANG GitHub tracker, so that then it can be followed up.
That would be great. Usually such bugs that are really reported on the GitHub, they are dealt with in a very timely way. So please do that. And
I will check that, and if I found that, I will send to this. Yeah, just IPv6. Yes, I found that there is no warnings just right now. I found it on your pages, but I don't know. It's a couple of weeks ago.
If you use PYANG with really huge data models, and we had some to test, it can take some time. That's true. It's not terribly fast, but for normal life data models, that should work just fine. And really, there are no limits concerning the number of definitions or the depth of the hierarchy or things like that. So
yeah, thank you.
Sorry, Jason here. Are you might have mentioned at the beginning, I'm sorry if I missed it, but are your slides posted somewhere? Just because a lot of good links. And
again, it's the same as with the first part of the tutorial. They will be available on the IETF edu pages or.
Okay, well, there's on the meeting materials pages. Just there's a link for meeting materials. People may go looking there for this. Might be useful to stick them on there.
Right, they will be on the EDU webpage. Now they will be in multiple places like Yang Central and the Yang Doctors homepage with a link. Yes.
Yes, a lot of netconf and Yang related information is on the netconf Central pages that are maintained by Andy Bierman. Then PYANG Wiki, apart from this tutorial, the extended version of it, it also contains other tutorials and other materials, and more stuff is also available on the Yang Central site, where you can also download some other tools for working with Yang documents. So, any more questions?
Right, we've got a question. Do we have people here that are working with different SDOs? Okay, there is something that I would like you to mention, Martin. In the latest version of PYANG 1.6, there is like an extra option that we could use, because normally it's going to complain that you don't use like an IETF dash prefix, right? So if you come from IEEE, for example, you can put like a dash IEEE and it won't not complain about that. So
are you suggesting to change the IETF option into SDO or something like that?
Well, there is a new option. So we had this --IETF option that checks the rules in the Yang guidelines document 6087, and it also checks that the module name begins with IETF, and it checks that the XML namespace is one of the IETF namespaces. So I changed that plugin so that now there are two different command line options. One is called --lint, and it just checks all the generic recommendations from RFC 6087, but it does not check, the name of the module must start with IETF and so on. So if you want to check for the guidelines for a module that is not an IETF module, it might be vendor specific also, you can use the lint option to PYANG. It's going to check all the recommendations and guidelines.
And one last thing as well on this inter-SDO, because I'm receiving more and more requests from different SDOs who want to do like Yang models, and that's perfectly fine. It's good news. We have in the latest guidelines for writing Yang models, RFC 6087 bis, we've got a couple of extra sections for different SDOs. Please review this just to see if it makes sense, right? If we're missing anything, that will be key. You've got IEEE, MEF, BBF, they all want to do Yang models.
Okay, so if there are no more questions, thank you very much for your attention. And I think now we will continue.
Right. Oh, yeah, thank you. And thank you for you as well. So now what we have is what's called a Yang editing advice session. This is for the people who have like Yang models. And we have some available Yang doctors here. So what I plan to do is, if you want to discuss one of your Yang models, we just take a few minutes here to write your model, and we're going to divide the forces that we've got, and you can have maybe 15 minutes with the Yang doctors for all the questions that were not answered either in the Pyang session or in the Yang session before. So who has got like Yang data models that you want to discuss? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, you please come here. We're going to write them down. We want to get the best Yang doctor for you, depending on the technology, etc. And then we're going to assign one to you, and we'll just reshuffle the chairs or whatever, and you'll work in your corner on that Yang model. And for the Meet Echo guys, I mean, this is where we could stop the recording. Thanks.